A child's swing sways in the wind, but no laughter follows. On the edge of town, a supermarket stands empty, its shelves stripped bare long before the lights went out. And in a quiet suburban street, a for sale sign leans, sun faded, outside a home no one can afford anymore. Across Australia, cities that once promised opportunity, safety, and stability now hold their breath. Hospitals run low on nurses. Schools close for lack of students. Pensioners line up at food banks, ashamed, but with no other choice. And still, the headlines stay quiet, as if the unraveling isn't already underway. In places like Hobart, Newcastle, and even Sydney, the cracks aren't loud. They don't come with explosions. They come with silence. A missing bus, a closed clinic, a neighbor who just left. This isn't the collapse we prepared for. It's slower, sadder, harder to name, until it's already too close. How does a city disappear? Not in flames, but in whispers. And the question that lingers is not whether it could happen, but whether it already has. Because what's fading from view might be the very places we once called home. Number 10. Hobart. For generations, Hobart was known as a quiet jewel. A place where time moved slower, where fishermen returned with full nets, and families grew old in the same weatherboard homes where they were born homes. The mountain watched over the city like a sentinel, and the Derwent whispered its old rhythms. For many, Hobart was not just a destination, it was a memory held still. But behind the postcard views, something has shifted. In recent years, the city has become a hotspot, not for community, but for speculation. House prices have surged more than 60% in just 5 years, outpacing incomes and leaving generations stranded. What was once affordable is now unreachable. Locals call it the Airbnb invasion. Streets once filled with neighbors, now lined with lockboxes and strangers passing through. The cost? It's not just economic, it's deeply human. Retirees are being priced out of homes they've lived in for decades. Grandchildren move interstate because they can't afford to stay. A local grocer who once served 3 generations now locks up early with too few customers to stay open past dusk. The community doesn't leave all at once. It fades, one quiet departure at a time. And so the question lingers like the winter fog over the bay. When a city becomes too beautiful to live in, who is it really for? What legacy remains when the people who shaped a place can no longer stay? This is not collapse in the dramatic sense. It is erosion, slow, polite, and deadly. And Hobart may only be the beginning. Because further north, another city built on steel and sweat is facing its own quiet reckoning. Number 9. Wollongong. Once Wollongong stood as a symbol of Australia's industrial promise. The skyline was defined not by glass towers, but by smokestacks. Proud and humming, day and night. Steel was not just what Wollongong made, it was what it was. A city of work, grit and quiet pride. But today, the blast furnaces are quieter. The jobs that forged entire communities have vanished, outsourced or automated, and nothing substantial has taken their place. Manufacturing employment has dropped by nearly a third in the past decade, leaving behind skeletons of factories and futures alike. In the western suburbs, you'll find the silence, not just of idle machinery, but of schoolyards with shrinking enrollments, of shops with flickering open signs that rarely see customers. Families are packing up and leaving, taking with them the energy that once gave this city its strength. And those who remain? Many are older, retired, or unable to move, watching as the heartbeat of their hometown weakens by the year. The tragedy is not just economic, it's emotional. This was a city where one job could support a family, where fathers trained sons on the same shop floor. Now those shop floors are weeds and wind. So we must ask, what happens to a place when its reason for being is taken away? When the industry disappears, does the identity go with it? Wollongong hasn't crumbled, but it's been hollowed, quietly, painfully, and with little fanfare. And as the steel rusts, the dreams forged in it are left to decay. Further inland, the heart of the nation, the city meant to lead by example, is beginning to strain under its own weight. And what's cracking there may soon echo across the country. Number 8. Canberra. Canberra was never meant to be dramatic. Built by design, it was a city of order, calm, rational, deliberate. Roads fanned out like spokes on a wheel, each suburb named with care, each public space meant to reflect the dignity of a democratic nation. It was the capital, but never the spotlight. That was its strength. But even here, the foundation is starting to crack. Not suddenly, not loudly, just enough to notice if you're paying attention. Canberra's infrastructure is aging faster than it's being repaired. Public hospitals are overwhelmed, with some patients waiting months for surgery. Roads built decades ago now choke under the weight of a growing population, and the cost of housing, once modest by capital standards, has surged beyond the reach of many. Government workers, teachers, even nurses, the very people who hold this city together, are being pushed to the outskirts or out altogether, and there is a deeper exhaustion. An aging population, rising costs, and shrinking services have begun to quietly unravel the balance. In the suburbs, pensioners speak of isolation. In the city centre, shopfronts sit vacant. Even the Parliament lawns, once a symbol of civic engagement, are now more often empty than not. So the question emerges, quietly but urgently, if the capital itself begins to falter, what does that say about the rest of the country? If the seat of government can't maintain its own systems, how can it safeguard those elsewhere? Canberra was built to last, built as a symbol of reason and resilience. But now, even symbols are showing their strain, because just beyond the borders of bureaucracy, a city once seen as a sun-soaked paradise is discovering its foundations too are far less solid than they seemed. Number 7. Gold Coast. The Gold Coast has long sold a dream of surf, sunshine, and serenity. Towering high-rises shimmer along the shoreline, and golden beaches stretch endlessly beneath a brilliant blue sky. For decades, it was marketed as Australia's playground, and for many, the perfect place to retire. A place where the hardest decision might be whether to swim before or after breakfast. But paradise, it turns out, can be fragile. Beneath the glittering skyline, a quieter crisis is unfolding. Coastal erosion is eating away at the land. Flood insurance has become unaffordable for thousands, and property prices, once reasonable, have soared beyond reach. But the most unsettling shift is harder to see, a growing wave of homelessness among the elderly. In the shadows of luxury apartments, pensioners are living in cars or queuing at caravan parks that have long waiting lists and little space. Some who moved here to retire now find themselves displaced, victims of rising rents, lost income, or simply a system that no longer has room for them. The Gold Coast still sparkles, but more and more, it sparkles only for the wealthy. And so the question becomes, what happens when a city built to attract becomes unwilling to sustain, when the promise of a peaceful final chapter turns into a scramble for shelter? This is not a failure of beauty. The waves still roll in, the skies remain bright, but the beauty now stands in sharp contrast to the desperation just beyond the tourist brochures. The Gold Coast is still a mirage, bright, bold, enticing, but like all mirages, the closer you get, the more it fades. And far to the west, another city, older, prouder, and once powered by the land itself, is discovering what happens when the ground begins to shift. Number 6. Perth once stood as a symbol of independence, a city carved from isolation, proud of its distance and rich in resources. Fueled by the mining boom, it became a beacon of prosperity. Skyscrapers rose, fortunes were made, and for a time, it seemed as though Perth had escaped the struggles of the East. But the boom is long over, and what remains is a silence that spreads deeper each year. Western Australia's economy is still tethered to the price of iron and lithium. When markets dip, so too does life in Perth. Entire suburbs were built on the promise of fly-in, fly-out jobs that no longer come. Young people graduate into uncertainty. Youth unemployment here hovers near 16%, and for many, opportunity lies elsewhere, in the long journey east or far beyond the country's shores. In older neighbourhoods, homes stand half empty, small businesses close early. Families once built around strong wages now face quiet financial strain. The wealth once pumped into Perth rarely trickled down. It flooded a few and left many others behind. The human cost is subtle, but sharp. Parents watch their children leave for cities they cannot afford to follow. Retirees live in suburbs with no nearby clinics, no public transport, no future plans. The very distance that once gave Perth its identity now leaves many feeling forgotten. And so we must ask, what is the price of prosperity when it isn't shared, when a city thrives for a moment and then stalls, like a machine with no fuel? Perth still shines in the sun, but in the long shadows of its towers, a quiet reckoning waits. Because to the south, another capital is aging faster than it can respond, and the slow decay is harder to deny with each passing year. If you felt these changes where you live, you're not alone. Tell us, where are you watching from and what have you seen? This story is still unfolding, and your voice is part of it now. Subscribe to stay with us as we follow the signs others still choose to ignore. Number 5. Adelaide. A reference Adelaide. Adelaide was once called the city of churches, a place of calm streets, close-knit communities, and a slower pace that promised stability. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. For generations, it was a city people came home to, where families stayed close, and time seemed to stretch just a little longer between generations. But that stillness has begun to change, not with sudden collapse, but with a slow thinning. Today, nearly 1 in 4 Adelaide residents is over 60. And while the city expands in area, its heartbeat, the young families, the workers, the students, is moving away. The reasons are quietly systemic. Jobs have dwindled, industries have downsized, and for the youth, opportunity now lives interstate. As the next generation leaves, the city is left with an aging population and a shrinking workforce, a difficult balance that strains hospitals, transport, and local economies. The impact is felt in quiet corners, in retirement villages where staff are too few, in neighborhoods where once busy streets now sit in soft silence. A grandparent looks out the window, waiting for visits that come less often. The bonds that once held generations together now stretch across too many miles. And so the question rises, softly but steadily, what happens to a city when it grows older, but not forward? Can a place survive on memory alone, or does it need the pulse of a future to carry its past? Adelaide is not falling, it is fading, like an old photograph, warm but increasingly distant. Yet to the north, under the sun and storms, another city is facing a faster kind of pressure, not from age, but from climate, cost, and the question of how long it can hold together. Number 4. Brisbane. Brisbane has always felt like the future, bright, youthful, and full of motion, a city of riverfront walks, growing skylines, and subtropical ease. For many Australians, it was a place to start again, not as crowded as Sydney, not as cold as Melbourne, just right. But now, the future feels heavier. In the past decade, Brisbane has become one of the fastest heating cities in the country. Summers grow longer, hotter, and more dangerous. Heat waves, once rare, are now common and increasingly deadly, especially for the elderly. Many suburban homes, built decades ago for milder weather, are now ovens by mid-afternoon. And for those living on fixed incomes, cooling isn't always an option. But the crisis isn't only climate. Insurance premiums in flood-prone areas have tripled, rents have skyrocketed, and even with all its growth, the city is struggling to keep pace with demand. Pensioners who once looked to Brisbane as a final home now find themselves priced out, pushed out, or left without coverage in homes too risky to insure. In the outer suburbs, ambulances arrive too slowly. In the inner city, queues for public housing stretch longer than ever before. Behind the palm trees and polished towers, people are sweating through nights in silence, too proud to ask, too scared to leave. And so the question emerges: what happens to a city when comfort becomes a privilege? When survival itself depends on the thermostat and the postcode? Brisbane is still growing, but that growth now comes with a cost, measured in degrees, in dollars, and in the quiet suffering of those left in the margins. And further south, one of the nation's grandest cities, bold, global, and proud, is struggling to care for the very people who helped build it. Number 3. Melbourne. Melbourne has long seen itself as Australia's cultural soul, a city of ideas, art, sport, and movement. From laneways filled with music to bustling markets and libraries lit late into the night, this was a city that thrived on ambition and inclusion, a place where anyone with enough work could find a home. But in recent years, the ground beneath that promise has shifted. The skyline has grown taller, but so has the distance between those who rise and those left below. More than 30,000 people in Melbourne are now without stable housing. Many of them are older. Increasingly, women over 55 make up the fastest growing group facing homelessness. The crisis doesn't shout, it whispers. In the cold of a parked car, under a streetlight. In the quiet dignity of someone waiting outside a shelter that's already full. In once thriving suburbs, now pockmarked with desperation. Not because of crime or disaster, but because the rent went up and the wages did not. The deeper fracture lies in what housing has become. Not a home, but an investment, a market, a game played by those with more than enough, while others struggle just to stay warm. And so the question cuts close to the heart. What kind of city do we become when we forget the people who built it? When the hands that raised children, stocked shelves, cleaned schools, and kept lights on can no longer afford to live among the towers they once watched rise. Melbourne still moves, still creates, still dazzles. But beneath its elegance lies a quieter urgency. And further north, in a city built on coal and tradition, that urgency is growing louder as the future barrels toward communities still waiting for a plan. Number 2. Newcastle. Newcastle was carved by labour. For over a century, it burned with the fire of steel and coal, a city where trains rumbled day and night, and hard hats were passed down like heirlooms. Here, identity was forged in furnaces. Pride came from producing, from providing. But now, the furnaces are quiet. The global shift away from fossil fuels has landed squarely on Newcastle's doorstep. Coal, once the city's lifeblood, is now its burden. Exports are slowing, mines are closing. And while headlines speak of just transitions, the jobs have not kept pace with the promises. In the workshops and depots, you hear the same questions. What comes next? And will it come in time? Thousands of workers, skilled, experienced, and eager, now face uncertain futures. Training programs exist, but are limited. Some younger families leave. Others stay, waiting for industries that may never return. And for older residents, the change is disorienting. Whole neighborhoods built around a single industry now feel adrift. Pubs that once served shift workers now sit empty by mid-evening. High streets wear a kind of dust that isn't from coal, but from vacancy. So we must ask, what does a community become when the work that defined it disappears? When tradition turns into memory, and the next generation is told to look elsewhere? Newcastle is not resisting the future. It's waiting for it, hoping it won't come at the cost of its people, its pride, or its place in the national story. And just up the coast, a city far larger, far richer, and once thought untouchable, is now asking similar questions. Only there, it isn't industry that's failing. It's the cost of simply staying. Number 1. Sydney. Sydney has always been Australia's shining face to the world. Iconic, ambitious, restless, the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, the sprawling coastline, all symbols of a city in motion. For decades, Sydney stood as proof that prosperity was possible, that success could be built skyward. But beneath the skyline, the foundations are straining. Today, Sydney is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. The median house price has soared past $1.5 million, and rental bidding wars have become common, not for luxury penthouses, but for modest family flats and aging workers' cottages. For many, full-time work is no longer enough to live where they work. Essential workers, teachers, nurses, cleaners are being pushed farther to the fringes, commuting hours each day to serve a city that no longer makes room for them. The result is quiet, invisible dislocation, families split by distance, grandparents who rarely see their grandchildren, young adults unable to afford a home in the suburbs they grew up in. Sydney hasn't emptied, it's overflowing, but not with belonging, with pressure. And there is a deeper cost. When a city becomes unreachable to the very people who make it function, who is it really for? Can a city survive on investment if it forgets its human roots? The dream of Sydney, of golden opportunity under a blue sky, still lives in postcards and travel ads. But for many, it is becoming a place to leave behind, not run toward. This isn't a sudden fall. It's the slow tightening of a city growing faster than its soul. And across Australia, from coast to coast, the same question is being asked in different ways. What happens when the places we built no longer feel like they're ours? What we've just seen isn't just news. It's a mirror held up to the cities we thought we knew and the futures we once imagined for ourselves and our families. These aren't projections or distant warnings. They're realities unfolding quietly, right now, in the places many still call home. Behind every statistic is a household, a parent worrying about their child's future, a retiree wondering how far their savings will stretch, a community trying to hold itself together while systems built to protect it begin to fray. This isn't just about infrastructure or housing. It's about belonging, dignity, and the values we choose to carry forward. There is no single fix, but awareness matters. So does action, from rethinking how we vote and who we support, to how we care for our neighbors and listen to those most affected. Some cities may adapt, but if we don't face these stories now, we risk becoming strangers in our own country. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to stay informed. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what changes you've seen. And if this feels personal, consider sharing it with someone who should see it too. The more we know, the less we look away.